For as long as story's been told, few things have been as compelling as the rise of someone who suffered a great loss. However, for many characters, their tragic past ends up little more than a blatant attempt at making them more sympathetic. A sort of gimmick, much like having the villain kill a dog so that you know just how evil he is. But when the author plays his cards right and manages to craft a compelling tragic protagonist, one whose experiences are actually tied to the narrative, the connection it can have to the audience is like few others. It's why we cracked a bittersweet smile as Guts and Casca reunited, and why we celebrated as Naruto rose to become Hero of the Leaf, or why we cried whenever Violet failed to understand her own heart. These characters and so many others strike a chord with us. We feel their pain as if it was our own, and we hope to see them find the happiness they were looking for. And the shonen demographic houses some of the most iconic and remarkable tragic protagonists of all time. Characters such as Hyakkimaru, Edward, Arima, Chisei, and so many others. And this very season, two giants of shonen are led by their very own. Demon Slayer and Attack on Titan alike shook up the anime world from the moment they came onto the screen, both representing different aspects of just how great an experience watching anime can be. But there is substance behind all the hype, and that's why both struck a chord with so many fans all around the world. And I'd say at the center of it all are their protagonists. Tanjiro and Eren alike carry a heavy burden, and the way both their stories build upon that foundation is worthy of praise. And so I'd like to break down what made them memorable, how these tragedies helped characterize two of the most popular shonen characters, and how it set the tone for their respective series. Now, if you aren't caught up with either, I'd highly recommend you do so. And although there won't be anything major for either series outside the first few episodes, I'll be giving you a spoiler warning in case you'd prefer to go into them completely blind. Now, without further ado, let's dive into how Attack on Titan and Demon Slayer build upon a tragic protagonist and how that works in their favor.
Home was a pen. Humanity, cattle.
These are the words that set the tone for Attack on Titan from the very first episode. Eren lived his whole life trapped by walls, eager to see the world beyond them. So in a twisted way, it's ironic that what he wished for the most would bring about the end to everything he loved. And as the walls he hated so much crumbled, as screams echoed and buildings collapsed, there was little he could do other than stand there and bear witness as his own mother was torn apart by the jaws of a titan in front of his very own eyes, and all he could do was run away. The horror in the tragedy that haunts Eren is almost Lovecraftian in nature. He was truly helpless, insignificant when faced with a force beyond his understanding. And this moment is what ends up defining one of his core traits, something that remains even as the story comes to a close. Some would call him brave and most would probably call him reckless. But while in a way I would agree to both, I think there's a word much more fitting than either of those. Because he is both very afraid and well aware of how frail he truly is, and yet the conviction in his words as he swore to kill every single Titan never wavered. And throughout the course of the whole story, Eren stays forever traumatized by his inability to do anything, and yet he's unwilling to do nothing. He is stubborn to a fault. However, while his character is defined by this tragedy, it's not something he shoulders on his own, as it was a burden placed upon humanity as a whole. Attack on Titan as a series prefers to focus on the suffering of the group rather than that of the individual. And so Eren becomes our vessel into the horrors that fell upon the people behind Walmaria. He was only one of the many that lost all they had, and in this sense he's used to set the tone not just for himself, but all of humanity. He is scared and weak, but he still moves forward. Overall, Eren as a character gets a lot of criticism for how he behaves before the time skip. He is called simple-minded, childish, and hard-headed. And while to be fair I wouldn't disagree, where I differ from this criticism is that I see those very traits as what makes both his character and the series as a whole work as well as it does. Because Eren is stubborn and willing to let go of this black and white morality, and he never quite changed when it comes to this. Season 4 Eren is no different to Season 1 Eren in this regard. To him, everyone on his side is good and everyone against him is not. And in this way, up until the very end, Eren stays both simple-minded and hard-headed. the only real change being the awareness of his own hypocrisy. But even knowing himself to be a hypocrite, he is unwilling to change. Once more, Eren is unwavering, stubborn to a fault. And so, the fall of Wall Maria dictated not the start of his development, but instead marked its conclusion. Much like Eren, Tanjiro is defined by a tragedy that took his family. However, unlike the former, his character isn't as much defined by what he lost, but instead by what he didn't. He never had any desire for any more than what he already had. All he wanted was to get to watch as his brothers and sisters grew older and to live a humble life beside them. But even though in the world of Demon Slayer most are unlikely to ever come across a demon, there are always the unlucky few that do. And that is something that marks a key difference between both series. While Attack on Titan focuses more on suffering that is shared among many people, Demon Slayer takes a far more personal approach. One day after coming home late, Tanjiro is faced with the loss of his entire family. Every single one of them meeting their end at the hands of a demon, with the exception of one of his sisters, Nezuko, who was turned into one instead. And so, right from the start, this sets the focus of his suffering not on a quest for revenge, but one of empathy. Tanjiro never considered chasing after and slaughtering every single demon, because his sister is one herself. From the very start, he's made aware that those who end up as demons might very well have never wished for it in the first place. And even if they did, it could very well be a consequence of circumstances outside of their control. And so he doesn't have any sort of grandiose wish for revenge. The only thing he wants is to retain the one thing left of his former life, Nezuko. He doesn't really care about hurting those who made him suffer. He wants only to save the ones he still can, and to grieve the ones that he can't. So while Eren willingly turned himself into another cog in a cycle of war and death, Tanjiro wanted no part of it. And while the exploration of suffering in AOT is built around revenge and hatred, in Demon Slayer it's about acceptance. However, it is important to distinguish acceptance from reluctance to go against the evil in the world, and to instead see it as reluctance to become evil yourself in order to do so. Tanjiro will still sever the head of any demon who brings harm upon humans, but it comes not from a place of anger, but one of understanding. There is virtue in his acceptance of the tragedy that befell his family, virtue that, while perhaps unrealistic, helps establish empathy as a core theme of Demon Slayer and a core trait of its lead character. In a way, Tanjiro's behavior reflects the pillars of Buddhist philosophy. He accepts suffering as a part of life. He is aware a desire for revenge would only bring about more of it, and he knows that only through understanding can you ever free yourself from it. He wishes not to vanquish demons, but to save those he still can from their violent whims. He fights not for himself, but for those around him, and he sees the death of his enemies not as revenge for any atrocities committed, but as a sort of release for both its victims and its perpetrator. And perhaps through doing so, he will find it for himself as well. In many ways, Eren and Tanjiro reflect both sides of the same coin. While both suffered similar fates, the way in which they respond to it couldn't be further apart. And perhaps it comes down to what they let take priority, between seeking revenge for what was taken from them, or caring for what they still had left. Eren refuses to let go of what followed the fall of Wall Maria, even at the cost of those he still cares for, while Tanjiro would rather accept the passing of his family and vow to protect what's left of it. One willing to burn the whole world down for what was done to him, yet the other would let the rain wash it all away. I guess we could see it as one story giving us a more realistic response to tragedy, a selfish reaction that will only ever bring harm even to ourselves and those we love, and the other giving us more of an idealistic take on how much good we could do if only we learned to let go of what binds us. But discussing whether heroes should reflect reality or ideals is something we could go back and forth on without ever getting anywhere. In a way, we can relate to how Eren refuses to accept the cruelty of the world, and in another we can look at Tanjiro as someone to aspire towards. And although there's beauty in the story of someone who transcended their tragedy, it's hard not to admire how grounded Eren's refusal to let go is. However, as it tends to be when it comes to discussions of art, subjectivity is a significant factor, so I'd ask you to drop your own thoughts. I would love to go through the comments and see what you guys think of tragic characters, and what kind of approach to their writing you prefer. So, thank you all for watching, and without further ado, I'm Ayvhel, signing out.